as much as I could put on a brave face and stand in front of the cameras and be Mr. Upbeat, there was a part of me that died inside when I got the diagnosis at age 27. If somebody had have said to me 10 years ago, there's all these studies, and so far that the evidence is certainly pointing towards that if you're undetectable, you can't transmit the virus, that would have made a huge difference. It would have given me hope, because for that 10 years that I didn't know about that, I believed that I was dangerous, I was toxic. There's a few television shows here in the States that have done it, that have had HIV positive characters, but it always still felt like the HIV was kind of the character and then there was the person. And I really wanted to show it the other way. There's the person who just happens to be living with HIV. Without hope, without being hopeful, what do we have?
Hello and welcome back to the queerest podcast telling the fiercest stories. This is Queer Talker. I'm Ben Cicchetti, and this week I am joined by Emmy and GLAAD Award-winning creator, HIV activist, and host of Plus Life Media, Karl Schmid. Karl, welcome to Queer Talker.
Thank you for having me, and how modest of me to have my GLAAD Media Award right over my shoulder. How embarrassing! But I'm thrilled and I'm honored. I've had a look at you've had some fantastic guests, so I'm thrilled to be amongst them. Thanks for having me.
I'm super excited to get to know you better, to hear more about your work, but we'll start the way we always do, which is with our queer panic, rapid fire questions. You just respond with the first thing that comes to mind. Starting with, what was the first album you ever owned?
I'm going to age myself. Wham! Wake Me Up Before You Go Go.
That's a phenomenal first album to have owned.
And it's very queer, let's be honest.
Yeah. And speaking of music, if you had to lip sync for your life, what song would you be choosing?
Janet Jackson's Together Again, because I think I know most of the words, and that was the song that was kind of a big hit in the clubs when I first started going to bars and stuff.
I love that. I got such nostalgia for that song. It's a fantastic song. I saw her
It's
in
a good song, isn't it?
She's amazing.
Yeah.
Great choice. We all know, obviously, you live in the world of media, so I'm super curious. What is your favorite queer movie or TV show?
Oh, that's hard because I've got a few. The most recent favorite one is A Friend of Dorothy, and I know you had the director on recently, short film with Miriam Margolyes, but I also, two films that have stuck with me and I can always go back and watch. A Beautiful Thing, which is a British film, and Sordid Lives.
Amazing. I haven't seen Sordid Lives, so I'm going to have to check that out now. I love a good
it's very good. It's got Leslie Jordan in it. It's a classic, and Olivia Newton-John.
Amazing. Okay, well, I've got homework, which is great to have. Who is your ultimate queer icon?
That's easy. Dolly Parton.
Love that. Love that. Who is one person you would like to hear on this podcast?
Dolly Parton or Miriam Margolyes. She's always a good chat.
Yeah, she's phenomenal. I saw her on stage last year. She came to do her book tour. She's hilarious and just such a thought-provoking person. So I think that'd be amazing. And then what is one word you would use to describe your childhood?
International.
International. Interesting. Okay, well, we can explore that a bit more because as long-term listeners know, I have this theory that to understand an LGBTQ plus person as an adult, or any person really as an adult, you have to understand them as a young person. So you say international. What should I know about you as a young person to understand the Karl that sits in front of me today?
Oh, that's a great question. From the age of, I was very lucky and fortunate in that my family traveled quite a bit, and starting from a young age for me. And I have two older brothers. One of them is an actor, and he was on a very successful Australian soap opera called Neighbours. And so at the height of that show, we used to get to travel to the UK because he would do pantomime. So I started at age 9 doing these long trips I was born in Australia, traveling to the UK. And then when I was 10, my family, we moved to Fiji. And then when I was 14, we moved to New Zealand. And when I was 18, I moved to London. So it was always on the go. But I'm first generation Australian. So I have a Hungarian mother and an Austrian father. So grew up in just very, lots of different cultures. And then when I lived in Fiji as a young boy, I went to an international school. So I think that's why I say international, because I've been very, very, very lucky, fortunate to have been exposed to so many different cultures and ideas and the way people live and pray and socialize, which I'm so grateful for, because I think it's given me quite a broad, open mind as an adult and as a journalist and as someone who asks questions for a living. So yeah, does that sort of answer it? That's why I said international.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting, though, to your point, to what that must have taught you. There's two parts of that really stick out to me. Obviously, being a Brit, Neighbours is a household. Everyone watched it. Everyone watched it growing up. So I'm curious as to what that life was like, having a brother in that sort of role in Australia and UK, where it's such a huge thing. But then also, to your point, that experience of all those different cultures and like how much of that you still carry with you today.
Oh, I mean, I still carry all of that with me today. I can't sit still long enough. I was in New York on Thursday night. The week before that, I was in Las Vegas. The week before that, I was in Dallas. The week before that, I was in Thailand. I'm going back to New York tomorrow. And the rest of the year, I've got Brazil, Fiji, Greece, Australia, Japan, all before October. So I'm that guy that everyone's like, you're never home. Yeah, I'm still international. Your poor dog. Who looks after your dog? And I do that. That's the one thing I feel guilty about. But to the first part of that question, I was 7 when my brother got on that television show, and as I said, it was at the height of the Neighbours craze. Kylie was still in the show. Jason Donovan was still in the show, and it was wonderful because suddenly we were riding around in stretched limousines and being flown first class all over the world and stuff. And as a 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old, that's like, it's amazing. And I got to go to work with my brother every now and then. And I think that's what, I think a lot of younger siblings idolize or want to be like their big siblings. And there's a big age gap between my brothers and I. So my oldest brother is 8 years older than me. Christian's 6 years older than me. So, as a little boy, you just kind of want to hang out and be accepted by your big brothers. And so when I got to go to the set of Neighbours and see this amazing world of it was all make-believe, all that stuff I saw on television, all these houses that everyone lived in, and suddenly I was in this giant warehouse, and it was the coolest kind of, I was just left to go roam free. I could go wherever I wanted in the studio. They'd be shooting down one end of the stage and I'd be up in Paul Robinson's house messing around. And I think that's where, and because, you sort of idolize your big brother, that's where I got the bug to want to be in this world. And I started out, before I was sort of hosting and a journalist, I started out as a kid actor and did that for quite a few years because I followed in my big brother's footsteps. So it was really cool. And you'd come to England. We'd come to England sort of just before December, the start of Panto season. And it was madness. I mean, it was like rock star madness. So yeah, it was cool. But what it also taught me was that when he got older and sort of left the show and he moved to the UK and we moved to Fiji, my parents and I, and all that went away. At sort of 10 and 11 years of age, to sort of have experienced that celebrity world and then see, oh, it can also go away very quickly and you have to go back to normal life and adjust. It wasn't a hard adjustment at the time. And I think it set me up for what a life in this industry, and I live in Los Angeles now, and realizing that when you're at the peak of the wave and the ride is high, it's fantastic, but every wave crests and crashes, and you have to be able to ride that downswing as well. and hopefully, you know, stay buoyant enough for the next wave when it comes up. And I think that's kind of how my career has gone, from starting out as when we moved to New Zealand, and I started working on television there as a 14-year-old, and then 15, 16 working on as a host on a Saturday morning kids TV show. And then that all going away when I was 18, and then it's slowly coming back when I was in my early 20s, and it's kind of up and down, and you have to learn how to ride the wave. So I think all of that was sort of a good foundation for me to understand a little bit more about how this industry works, and not get so caught up in it, because it is very easy to get caught up in all that fun stuff, but understand that that doesn't always last, and what you've got to you know, ride the wave, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think that must have given you quite a lot. I used a similar analogy recently to talk about kind of LGBTQ plus rights and how it kind of comes in waves, and often it's that pullback of the wave that you have to kind of then fight harder so the wave goes further next time. And obviously we'll get into kind of the current state of the LGBTQ plus community. But I'm also curious, in that environment, in that kind of celebrity entertainment media environment, for you, do you remember the first LGBTQ plus person you just kind of became aware of, either in real life and your interactions in that world, or just seeing them through media?
Yeah, I remember, well, you know, I remember my mother's hairdresser back in the early 80s, Darren Grayson, who's still alive and still cutting hair, I found out. And it was you know, it was more the flamboyant gay that I first became aware of. So, you know, Darren Grayson's hair salon was the best hair salon in the town we lived in, and it was, you know, it was stunning, but he was very over the top, and it was all this. And then I also remember a wonderful a man named William, who was a makeup artist on Neighbours. And, you know, this, again, very flamboyant, but very caring and attentive person, who used to call me Pet whenever I'd go into, and I think he still worked on the show, like right up until close to the end. Those were the two, but it was a sort of a flamboyancy of queer that I remember. And now as I'm an older man, and I think back on people who were in my life when I was little, I mean, there was a teacher at kindergarten who now, when I think back on it, I go, oh yeah, that makes sense. He was totally a gay man, but obviously I didn't have the words for it back then. But my first sort of realization of gay, and remember, this is sort of growing up in Australia in the 80s, early 80s, it was the flamboyancy of it all, of sort of queer and gay, that you recognized more so than, you know, other attributes that you know, we can identify today.
Yeah, and then I'm curious about your own journey then, your kind of own journey of self-discovery against that kind of backdrop, because we all saw those kind of those representations that were kind of more common in the 80s and the 90s, and we see a much wider representation of the queer community now. So that journey for you, but then also I often think about, or I'm drawn to people who are very authentic, and so I'm always curious to understand when people started to feel that authenticity inside themselves, and then when for you did you feel you could just bring that authenticity to everything that you do?
Well, it's interesting. And you know, I don't mean to be a downer now, but I'm a survivor of someone who was sexually abused as a very young child. I was 3 years old when my oldest brother's best friend, who was I think 13 at the time, you know, sexually assaulted and abused me. And you have to realize that at 3 years of age, when your big brother's best friend says, hey, let's play this game, and it's going to be our secret game, you go, okay, you don't realize it's bad. And although it's a bit weird and uncomfortable with what was going on, you still believe, because the 13-year-old boy who's your big brother's best friend says, this is our special game, that there's nothing wrong with it. And it's not until you get to sort of primary school or elementary school as I did, when at age 6 or 7, and we started learning about stranger danger and stuff. And, you know, if a man touches you here and a boy does this to you, that's bad. And again, remember, it's 1987, so it's really bad, and it's wrong, and it's all of this. And as a young kid, I've gone, well, hang on, but we played this game and it was kind of fun. And now am I a bad now because I did
Mm.
that? I'm a bad person. Because there were certain elements of it that I did not enjoy, but there were other elements that I thought, okay, it's sort of, so was I now a bad person? And all the media at that time, and then it was, of course, the onslaught of AIDS in Australia, and the campaigns that went with that. Um, I, I realized I had this attraction to boys. I don't know whether that attraction came from because of what happened to me as a 3-year-old, but it was there. Now, everything I hear, that means it's bad. So shut up about it. And I sort of kept that quiet to myself. I mean, I didn't come out to my family until I was 18. I think in my social circles, it was probably more like 15, 16 people who I felt safe with and in groups that I hung out with. And it was never, I'm gay. It was just, I didn't hide it. And I also, when I did come out to my family, I never lied about my sexuality. My mother, my mother's very direct, and she would ask me, and she would also ask my brother, because the whole family thought Christian was gay because the showbiz world, and she would outright, she'd go, "Are you gay?" And she would ask, I was 13, 14 years old, and I was certainly having experiences with other boys my own age at that point and experimenting. And she would ask me out, she'd go, "Are you gay?" And it used to drive her insane because I would say, "That's none of your business." I never lied about it. And she would say, "What do you mean it's none of my business?" I go, "It's none of your business. I don't ask what you and Dad got up to in the, like, it's none of your business." And I mean, obviously my family had very strong suspicions, rightfully so. But so I knew from a very early age, and for a long time I was frightened because it was wrong and bad, and then, AIDS. And I remember when I came out to my mother, it was very dramatic. My mother took it worse. My father was like, great. My grandmother at the time was like, yeah, so what? And when my mom finally came around to it, and it wasn't that she was upset and I think a lot of mothers feel this. She thought she'd let me down. She thought she'd failed me as a mother.
Mm.
And that's what upset her the most. She was, when we finally got to talking about it, she said, I should have provided you a home where you felt safe that you could talk about this. And I said, what teenager wants to talk about any part of their sexuality or sex life, be them straight, gay, bisexual, non-binary? I don't know many teenagers, back then at least, that want to have that conversation with their parents or their siblings. It's just, it's like I said, I don't want to know what you and Dad got up to. But she felt she had failed me. And then she said, well, I can accept this. It's, of course we love you. And I'm very, very lucky. My family, my brothers, everyone in my orbit has always been, I received very well. But she did say, I remember she said to me, just don't get AIDS. Whoops. 27 years of old age, I was diagnosed HIV positive, but that's further down the line. But yeah, I sort of always, I knew from an early age, and it was in there, but I never, like I said, I never lied about it. I just chose to think, well, that's my business. It's nobody else's business, until I was ready and felt comfortable to have those conversations. That's sort of what I'd say to anybody, really, is it's your business, whether it's your sexuality, whether it's your HIV status, it's your business. And, it's no one's right to tell you when you should be accepting of it or accepting of others accepting it. That has to happen on your terms.
Yeah, and you mentioned obviously that in 2018 you publicly shared that you are HIV positive after keeping it,
Mhm.
private for, I think you said, almost a decade. Can
Yeah.
you take me back to that moment and kind of what gave you the feeling of the ability, or made you feel ready, or made you feel comfortable to say it out loud, having kind of spent all that time in the media industry as well?
Yeah, well, it was 2 vodka martinis and a Xanax that gave me the confidence and the safety to say it out loud. Look, it wasn't thought. I didn't think about it. It wasn't a planned coming out. As you said, you know, I, I, I was not, again, I never lied about it. I was not secretive about it. My sexual partners knew about it. My friend group knew about it. My family knew about it. I didn't talk about it professionally because I didn't see how my HIV status affected what I did on television or in the media. You know, it had nothing to do with how I interviewed people or how I turned up on camera and did my work. So I just didn't think it was something that needed to be talked about. And, you know, very well-meaning people in my orbit who did know said, look, you don't want to be known as the guy with AIDS on television, which is a stupid statement because it's HIV. I'm not, you know, AIDS this day and age, but you don't want to, you know, you don't want to be known as the HIV guy because they'll pigeonhole you and put you in a box. And I thought, yeah, because like I said, it's got nothing to do with how I do my job, how I talk to people, how I treat people. So I just, you know, I didn't, it was a non-starter. But there is this wonderful organization from a guy out of Scotland who created this fantastic Instagram account called the AIDS Memorial. And I don't know if you know it, but, or your listeners and viewers know it, but it's an Instagram account where people can post pictures of people we've lost to AIDS-related illnesses over the years. And it's and actually Madonna used it in her last tour. She had a whole thing with pictures, and it's a phenomenal Instagram account, and its hashtag is "What is Remembered Lives." And I was aware of this account, and they sell merchandise, and so that helps raise money to help with housing and stuff for low-income people living with HIV. So I bought this T-shirt, said the AIDS Memorial T-shirt, and it had been sitting in my closet for a long time, and I wanted to somehow contribute to this Instagram account because it's so moving, but I didn't have a story, right? I didn't have a friend, I didn't have a family member, there wasn't that, but I had my own story. So it was a Friday afternoon. I'd rushed home from work. I pulled the T-shirt out of the closet to change into. I went and met friends for a drink. And I said to a friend, can you do me a favor? Take a photo of me in this T-shirt because I need to post about it one day. So I took this photo and I thought, oh, that's quite a nice picture. And we had happy hour and, you know, my friend came over and we hung out a bit at my place. And as he was leaving, he said to me, don't do anything stupid tonight. And I was like, what are you talking about? I've had martinis. I'm going to take a Xanax and go to bed. It's Friday night. And I looked at the picture and I thought, well, nice picture. I'll post it on Facebook and Instagram. And I didn't really even think about it. I just wrote that, you know, I don't have a story of someone, but I have my own story and this is who I am. And I've been, you know, living with HIV and I'm just like you. And it, you know, it was just very personal. It wasn't edited. There was no chat GPT back then or any invite. It was just, I spoke from the heart, posted it, and I went to bed. And that was it. And then the next morning, it had blown up overnight. And my friend called me and he said, I told you not to do anything stupid. And I said, what are you talking about? And it started rolling in and suddenly, you know, news media has picked up on it. You know, ABC journalist comes out as HIV positive. And this thing just snowballed. And I remember sitting in my car somewhere that morning and having this panic moment going, my God, ABC are going to think I've done this on purpose to generate publicity, that was when I started to fear for my job. I'm like, I'm going to get fired over this, but not because of the HIV, but because I'd dropped a bombshell apparently and not consulted anyone at the network. Fortunately, that wasn't the case. And ABC was Disney and the ABC company were phenomenal. And you know, the majority of the feedback I got and to this day, the messages I get. And it's because of that actual response that I got that we created Plus Life, which is, you know, where I'm sitting in the Plus Life studio today. And 7 years later, we're still producing content about HIV, talking about HIV in normal ways that would be like you and I, you know, like the chat we're having now, or as if we went to the pub and had a beer or a cup of coffee, to destigmatize it. Because I remember my boss at ABC calling me and saying, this should not be a news story in 2018. And I said, I completely agree. It shouldn't be. But even today, it's a news story. You have other people in entertainment who come out and suddenly it's, the best. I mean, and great. But why is this still a news story in 2026? It shouldn't be, but it is.
Yeah, and to your point, you said earlier it wasn't anyone's business and therefore you didn't feel the need to tell that story, but it does talk to the power of stories, right? Like, and I think about that a lot. And
Yes.
it's the reason I do this podcast. It sounds like it's the reason you do a lot of what you do, which is so many people can learn so much or see themselves seen through a story. We had a show here in the UK called I Kissed a Boy, and there was a very famous scene in the most recent season where Adam talked about being HIV positive, and he talked about the use of the word dirty and how that the use of the word clean. So, are you clean? And how that makes him feel dirty. And it's that use of language that we often don't. TV and stories give us the opportunity to hear those stories and reflect on how we talk about it. And obviously, one of the most powerful messages today is you equals you, meaning undetectable equals untransmittable. Why do you think that even with these stories, it feels like that message still hasn't quite broken through widely enough? And what changes do you think what do you think we need to see change for people to truly understand the you equals you message, but also kind of the language that has become so common especially in queer culture?
Well, I think going back to the first part of your question there, why is this still a thing? And because, for so long, HIV has been linked to sex and IV drug use. And we built phenomenal campaigns, and I don't use the word phenomenal necessarily in a good way, in to say that they were wonderful campaigns, but we built these campaigns in the 80s and early 90s that scared the living daylights out of everybody. The Grim Reaper comes to mind. I know that ran in the UK as well. But I think people then were going, well, we don't know what this is. We don't know how to stop it. We don't know how it's, so let's just scare the hell out of people really effectively. And hopefully that, encourages people to, wear a condom or not even have sex and think twice before sharing a needle. And the problem is they did such a good job that those campaigns are still to this day seared into people's memories. Then you bring it back to, sex. I know here in America, a very puritanical society, people just can't deal with talking about sex. People in this country can't say the word penis. You have adults who say wiener. They can't even say toilet. They say, do you need to go? I'm not kidding. Do you need to use the potty? I'm like, I'm a 46-year-old man. What are you talking? So when you have societies that can't even say words, just like normal words, you create this world of people sort of just not wanting to deal with it. It's over there, and as long as it's the gays, and as long as it's the IV drug users, and as long as it's the sex workers, it's over there. It's not our problem. We're fine with it. And so, language, like you said, if someone says, on those apps, I remember the language, clean DDF UB2. Yeah, it makes a person feel dirty. I think coming back to you equals you, which is just life-saving. I mean, it's just phenomenal. And it's the cheapest sexual health campaign message I think anyone could ever come by. You equals you. If you're undetectable, you're untransmittable. Guess what? That's it. There's nothing else behind it. I think when you've got something almost as simple as it is, people want to find ways to say, well, no, it can't be that simple. It simply can't be. But it is. I mean, study after study after study after study shows that if you are a person living with HIV and you are on effective treatment and your viral load is undetectable, you cannot transmit the virus sexually to a partner. And we're learning more and more and more. More data is coming out. I hope that soon, breastfeeding will be considered not a risk. The evidence all certainly suggests that. But people want to find a reason to still not believe, and people still want to find a reason to, almost find blame or something, especially towards, queer people or sex workers or IV drug users. I know in America there is, and rightfully so, a huge distrust in the medical system, especially as it relates to Black and brown folks. There've been horrible things that have happened in this country, horrible things that would make a lot of people go, I don't trust what they're saying. Why should I trust that? So it's a big trust issue, but that again is something why another reason why we created Plus Life. When I came out publicly in 2018, I'd never heard of U equals U, and the studies were there at that point. And a year later would be when the World Health Organization, CDC, came on board and backed it. But I got really cross. The guy who created U equals U, Bruce Richmond, reached out to me, saw my story, reached out, and he said, do you know about U equals U? I said, I don't know anything about it. And then I went to my doctor and I said, what's this U equals U? Oh yeah, it's this, this, this. And I said, why would you not have told me about that? Well, it's the studies are ongoing. And I said, but here's the difference. If somebody had have said to me 10 years ago, look, you're going to be fine, which is what they said in the clinic in London, at the Dean Street Clinic. You're going to live a long, healthy, happy life. You take your medicine, you will be absolutely fine. They said all of that. But if somebody had have said to me, oh, and by the way, there's all these studies, and so far, the evidence is certainly pointing towards that if you're undetectable, you can't transmit the virus, that would have made a huge difference. It would have given me hope, because for that 10 years that I didn't know about that, I believed that I was dangerous, I was toxic, and as much as I could put on a brave face and stand in front of the cameras and be Mr. Upbeat, there was a part of me that died inside when I got the diagnosis at age 27, 27-year-old young gay man living in London, having, this really at the start of his life. Suddenly I felt handcuffed, and I was, terrified that I could potentially infect or transmit this to somebody else. Now, if someone had have said to me back then, when those studies were going on, look, it would have given me hope. It would have given me something to look at, something to research, and certainly would have had an effect, I think, on the internalized stigma, which we don't talk enough about, which really did a number on me and does a number on a lot of people. And I'm still dealing with that. I'm still dealing with coming out of that, of believing I was damaged goods, that I was dangerous, and that I was toxic. And it's one thing for people to say that to your face, which happened to me, but you start to believe it, and it can lead you to some pretty dark and scary places, as it did me.
So I don't want to kind of like pull on like the negative thread, but I am like,
Sure.
how do you start to overcome? Because I think it is the things we internalize can be as negative as the things that we are externally aware of. I think about this a lot from a homophobia point of view. We all internalize a certain amount of homophobia. I grew up in the 90s where being gay was considered the worst. You call everything negative was synonymous with gay. So I grew up with that, and you had to kind of unpick that. And I think it took well into my 20s and 30s to kind of unpick that and to really feel confident and comfortable with who I am. So for you, how did you go about, and continuing to go about, for anyone that might be listening to this, unpicking that internalized stigma around HIV?
It is ongoing and daily. Therapy. I got into therapy, a lot of it. I think creating Plus Life, creating what we do here, has been a huge part of it, because there is no filter on me. For some reason, when I sit down in front of this, essentially a piece of glass and camera and start talking, I feel very comfortable and very much at home, and connecting with other people who are living with HIV, or people who work in the field, or who are activists, or even having conversations with, we've had my family on and talking, just having real conversations. It's talking about it, I think, is the answer to your question. Saying it out loud and it's the best sort of therapy for me. Sharing stories, not comparing, but listening to other people's experiences, saying, yeah, actually a bit of that happened to me, or did this happen to you? That has been, for me at least, a huge part. So I would say therapy, creating this space and what we do at Plus Life, talking about it. But it's ongoing. I mean, it screwed me up for relationships. You know, I didn't have a serious relationship for that 10 years. And then I truly believed that I would never, ever have what we deem a healthy, happy relationship with a person ever again. I thought really the only way that um, sex would happen for me would be hookups on apps, or, you know, situations that weren't particularly, well, not even particularly, just were not healthy. And then I met somebody and it just changed everything. You know, for whatever reason, that person came into my life, and I realized I could do this without drugs, without alcohol, and without going to dark places, and it was wonderful. And then, you know, that, as relationships do, that relationship ended, and I got very scared that I would spiral straight back down into where I'd been. But I didn't. And by that point, you know, we were doing this, and it gave me a purpose. It gave me a real solid purpose for what we're doing. And now, you know, I'm in an incredibly fantastic relationship with someone, and it's been a little over a year, but there are still moments where, you know, I will make a throwaway comment without really thinking about it, about somehow being damaged or not being good enough, or, you know, so and he'll look at me and go, what are you talking about? And I'll go, you're right. But it's an ongoing thing. So for me, it's been therapy, talking about it, community, connecting with community, and creating spaces and creating situations that allow me to talk about it and live it out loud.
Yeah, which I am so interested to dig into Plus Life Media, because I think it's such an incredible, we talked about it just earlier, and then we just talked about that, just the power of stories, and then the power of, as you've said, building a community where people can feel seen and their stories can be heard. So obviously you co-founded Plus Life Media to bring the conversation about HIV back kind of into the mainstream and in a more positive way than it had been in the past. What do you think it was that was missing about that conversation that you wanted to talk about? And what did you want Plus Life to do different from what we've seen in the past?
Well, I think the majority of media we see, and even still today with HIV storylines, still harkens back to the doom and gloom. You know, and there's been fantastic shows, and they're important. They're incredibly important, because we do now have generations who thankfully didn't live through the horror that was the 80s and 90s of HIV and AIDS. But because of that, it's this doesn't matter anymore. You know, okay, if I end up HIV positive, I take a pill every day, or I get a, you know, injection every couple of months. And it's both a blessing and a curse. Yes, that's great. And yes, I will live a long, hopefully healthy, happy life as long as I take care of myself. And yes, if you are diagnosed HIV positive, you can too. That's great. But we still, with entertainment and media, we're still showing those doom and gloom storylines. We're not just living with HIV. You know, it's very rare. There's a few television shows here in the States that have done it, that have had HIV positive characters. But it always still felt like the HIV was kind of the character, and then there was the person. And I really wanted to show it the other way. There's the person who just happens to be living with HIV. And so the storytelling, I mean, for us, it's mostly conversational at Plus Life. You know, our weekly digital show, Plus Talk, that goes up across our platforms, is everyday conversations just like you and I are having with people who happen to be living with HIV, sharing their experiences. Or we're taking quite complicated science and medicine and talking about it in a way that's actually understandable. And I think that's the other thing that has been missing, is that, you know, HIV can be quite complicated. Once you start with the medical professionals and the scientists, a lot of it just goes whoosh over your head. It does mine. I go in and see my doctor and he starts prattling off numbers to me. And I'm like, look, I don't know what any of that means. Just, how is everything? Am I still alive? Do my kidneys functioning? All that. Yeah. And that's not, I should care more, but it's above my pay grade. So that's another part of the conversation that we really have here at Plus Life and on the Plus Talk episodes. We sit down with the world's best doctors and scientists and say, okay, why haven't we found a cure yet? And talk to me like a normal person. And I think that has been missing, whether it's in scripted television or just factual stuff. And I also believe that the more you say the three letters HIV, the less scary it becomes. And the more conversation, the more people talk about it, the more familiar people are. There was a period where no one said cancer. It was called the C word, which now the C word is another fabulous word that that one shouldn't say as often as one sometimes does. But people didn't say cancer, right? Yeah. Nowadays, it's cancer, schmancer, and that's great. And we run towards people with cancer and we embrace them and we do 5K runs and we want to do all of this stuff because it's no longer a scary thing. It was the same with divorce. People never talked about divorce. Oh gosh, divorce. It was stigmatized. So I'm a firm believer, the more we talk about HIV, the more you see people who just happen to be living with HIV, great, get on with it. The more we do that, the less scary it becomes, the less over there it is, the less that's their problem. But sadly, especially here in the United States, we are dangerously at risk of going backwards because of, silly politics and idiots in Washington who think they know better, but really just want to line their own pockets and stay in power. And we run a very serious risk of going backwards in this country. And now, sadly, in sub-Saharan Africa, because of the things that the current administration here in the States has done. Not wanting to go too political, but that now more than ever, it's so important that people see and hear people who look and sound just like them, who, just happen to be living with HIV as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it is that, people need to see people living healthy, happy lives to know that it's possible for them too. And that we all understood, well, for us to grow up through the 80s and 90s, we have that kind of preconceived conception of certain kind of certain things. And therefore being able to see people know you can live this very happy, healthy, fruitful, successful life. And that's why I think what you do is so important, because you are telling the stories of general people, but you're also unlocking. Education is so important, which is why it's so scary to see some of the things that are happening around education, where people aren't allowed to talk about certain things anymore in certain states. It's so important to have those conversations. That's why what you do and the platform you've created is so important, because people can find it themselves. So they don't, if they're not going to get it through education, they can find it through you, right?
Right. And I've always said from day one that I want people to see and hear people who look and sound like them. And diversity has become atrociously a dirty word for some reason in this country. Well, I do know why. It's, stupid, rich old white men wanting to stay in power. That's why. But it's incredibly important to what we do. And to your point about education, this year we're heading to Rio de Janeiro at the end of July for the International AIDS Conference, the biggest gathering of HIV and AIDS, not only medical professionals, but activists, community in the world. Something like 20,000 people turn up for this conference. And we will be there on the ground, and every day we will be talking to the very best scientists, but also the people at the very, grassroots community level, and sharing all of that information back out through our platforms in ways that are understandable, relatable, because that's important. And I remember I got it, some of the DMs I get, and there was one person for a while who would be literally watching our content on a cell phone. I'm not kidding, in a closet. They would hide in a closet in Pakistan and watch our content. And it was their only way to feel connected. and we still get messages. I still get messages from people who are saying, thank you. I hope one day maybe I'll be able to be brave enough like you. But at least for now, I've got a way to see and hear conversations that, oh my gosh, for the first time ever, I feel seen and heard by watching what you guys do. So it's incredibly important for us that we have that reach and that we have those conversations. And sometimes they're difficult conversations. Sometimes the guests we have on, I, strongly disagree with, and they disagree with me. And that's okay too. I think we also live in a society now where it's become very popular to not be able to respectfully disagree with someone.
Yeah.
It's either you're right or you're wrong, and there's nowhere in between anymore, especially in this country, whether it's politics, or politics is the big one. But I think having a disagreement is healthy. You and I can talk about something, we can disagree on it, and then maybe 10 minutes later or an hour later, I sit there and I think, gosh, what he said, I could kind of see that. And that's how we grow. So it's by talking about stuff. We've become so black and white. It's this or it's that. And there's no one's prepared to even compromise or meet in the middle. You can't safely have an opinion anymore either. I was having this conversation literally just yesterday in the car with my boyfriend, and I had an opinion on something, and he said, that's really mean. And I said, why is that mean? Well, it's, and I said, no, that's my opinion. You don't have to agree with it. That's how I see it. And it's okay. I don't think I'm being mean because my opinion happens to be different from your opinion. We've become very sensitive to that. So hopefully what we do at Plus Life is invite people in to have conversations. Sometimes they're messy. Sometimes they get a little warm under the collar, but that's life and that's colorful. And I think that's healthy.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's one of the things that's come from social media. There's a lot of positive things that have come from social media, but the ability to voice an opinion and therefore disagree with someone's opinion has become so normal and rewarded.
And let's cancel them.
Media.
Yeah,
exactly. But it is all about as well the kind of the visibility that you can bring. And I know you've also helped bring HIV Unwrapped to life, including during New York Fashion Week, which I'm obsessed with. So for our listeners who haven't seen it, what is HIV Unwrapped and where did that idea come from? And why did fashion feel like such a powerful way to change the conversation around HIV?
Yeah, I wish I could take full credit for this, but I can't. HIV Unwrapped came actually out of Australia. A wonderful human being that we work very closely with and is a dear friend and actually has been a mentor of mine since I sort of publicly came out about my HIV status, Brent Allen, who had this idea. They were at World Pride in Sydney, and they saw there was some exhibition that had paired, queer industry makers with art. And he sort of festered on this idea of, well, what if we took HIV science and paired it with fashion? And so the idea is, and for New York Fashion Week, and hopefully we're doing it again this year at Fashion Week, that's the plan, and we're about to do it in Brazil, and it's been done in England, and it's been done in Rwanda, and it's been done now all over the world. I think Sweden is doing a version of it now, Canada's doing a version. But what we do is we take, let's say, 9 top HIV scientists, experts, activists, and we pair them with 9 emerging fashion students. And over the course of a couple of months, we pair them up and they meet via Zoom, or sometimes they meet via person, and they get to know each other. And essentially they collaborate on an idea to take what can be very complicated science or political messaging and translate it into a piece of fashion. And then that fashion, as you mentioned, last year walked the runway during New York Fashion Week. And it's a wonderful way to showcase and reignite the conversation about HIV. Look, everyone likes fashion. When you see a garment, it's something you can touch, you can feel, you can walk around it, you can experience it. And this is, as we've said, normally very complicated stuff that is in laboratories and God only knows what it means. So not only are we showcasing science, but we're also now having conversations. A lot of these students don't know a lot about HIV because they're of a generation that didn't live through it, the worst of it. And what I think is the most rewarding thing for me with this whole project is seeing how these young students suddenly learn about HIV and the science of it and actually get inspired and excited by it, and then learn about U equals U, learn about PrEP, and are saying, well, I never knew that. And then they're telling their friends who are telling their friends. And we're now having a brand new conversation, an important conversation about HIV, about undetectable equals untransmittable, about the benefit of PrEP. That we haven't been having, and we're doing it in a way that is sort of pop culture and exciting and fresh. So it's been incredibly rewarding to see those relationships and conversations. And also, you know, you've got scientists who are often in a laboratory working by themselves, and they don't get to talk about this stuff. And when they do, people are like, and now they're invigorated because they're getting to see their life's work suddenly become this stunning, spectacular piece of fashion that everyone's now asking about. So it's a wonderful way, I think, that we've reignited this conversation. And as I said, we're hoping to bring it back to New York Fashion Week this year. It's happening in Rio for the AIDS conference. I know it's happening in Australia in September. I think the UK just had their second one. Sweden is doing it. Canada is doing it. And it's just, yeah, it's incredibly rewarding to be a part of it, and to see these relationships happen between designer and scientists. It's really cool.
I'm so interested to know how it must feel for you to see these things come to life, right? If we think about that journey we've just taken you on from kind of your early days in kind of the entertainment space to your own personal journey to obviously what you're doing now, looking at things like Plus Life Media, seeing that come to life, looking at things like New York Fashion Week, seeing that come to life, how does that feel for yourself when you have those moments to sit back? 'Cause we all get so busy, but when you have those moments to sit back and reflect, how do you feel and reflect on that?
Well, it's interesting. This is part of my ongoing journey of dealing with my internalized stigma and believing that somehow I'm not good enough, or somehow I'm bad, or somehow. So yes, I don't want to take away from it. Certainly, I'm incredibly proud of what we have created at Plus Life, and you know, there is a fantastic team that puts all of this together and makes this happen on a daily basis. And without them, and I get a little emotional talking about them, but you know, my partners Brent and Mike are two white straight guys from the Valley. You know, they're both the same age as my oldest brother, and to see how much they've learned and grown through this process about HIV, and they're both dads with young, you know, teenage kids who are starting their adult lives, and to listen when I listen to them talk about what we've created, that's when I get proud. I think that's when I allow myself sort of to quietly sit back and go, wow, look at what we've done. I'm not very good at standing going, oh yes, this is fat. You know, I constantly have my friends telling me that, you know, Karl, you really should take a minute. But for me, it's always a little bit, it's a blessing and a curse. The grass is always slightly greener, you know, on the other. So what's the next thing I'm doing? What's the next thing I'm doing? And we've done some great, you know, we got nominated for an Emmy for a television show we did about HIV and aging and housing, which was called Marty's Place. We're very proud of it. HIV Unwrapped, as you mentioned, we're about to produce something in Fiji, because Fiji, which was a country I lived in, as I mentioned earlier, and had formative years, has the fastest and highest rate of HIV infection of anywhere in the world. So there's a very, very important story to be told out of Fiji, which in August we're going to go down and start telling that story and be part of a movement to help the Pacific Island nations, and Fiji in particular, get a grip of this, because it's frightening. Look, when it feels good, but I'm not very good at patting myself on the back and allowing myself to say, well done. I have a hunger in me, right? And I've had this since I was a kid. I'm incredibly stubborn, and I put myself out there in positions where it's either succeed or fail, and there's nowhere in between. And also there's been plenty of times when I've failed and fallen over, and thank God I have, because I think the biggest and best lessons I've ever had have been in those failure moments, whether it's personal or professional or what we're trying to build. I've never learned anything by always being right and getting it right the first time. So yes, I am very proud of what we do, and I need to be better at being proud of myself, I guess.
You should be incredibly proud, and we'll all pat you on the back on your behalf, because I think what you're doing is so incredible.
That feels good. I'm good. Yeah, thank you.
I just think it's so incredible. As someone that's doing this podcast, I just always look at people who are able to put themselves out there and create. To me, it is all about creating those communities and creating a place for people to go, and a place for people to be seen, and a place for people to be heard. I just think that's really, really important. I think about the journey we've just gone on this podcast with you. And obviously we started this conversation talking about your younger self. And so I'm always curious, as we wrap this up, if you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be? And then would it be different if I said, what advice would you give to a young LGBTQ plus person or someone who's newly diagnosed with HIV today?
It's a good question. It's such a saying of the moment, which it makes my skin crawl a little bit, because it's not language I normally use. But I would say to my younger self, give yourself some grace. Oh God, it just sounds so corny, but maybe there's a better word than grace. But I think that would be helpful for the younger version of me. Give yourself a little bit of grace. And maybe I need to do that now as an adult as well. And the advice, well, it wouldn't be that different that I would give someone newly diagnosed. I think the important thing for somebody who's newly diagnosed is to know that you should be hopeful and that there is hope. And that can be very difficult, especially in the times we're living in at the moment. But without hope, without being hopeful, what do we have? So, give yourself the space to sit on the floor and have a tantrum, have some epic tantrums, cry, scream, shout, do all of that. Get it out of your system. That's okay. And every now and then you're going to fall over, and you're perfectly allowed to sit there on the floor and throw that tantrum. But then realize that there is hope, and use that to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and take another step.
I love that. And that's really been the thing I've actually taken away from this, is this kind of sense of creating hope and recognizing hope. We talked about it with You Equals You. We've talked about it through your work. It is about creating this space for people to see hope. So I just really appreciate everything you're doing, everything from Plus Life Media to HIV Unwrapped, everything you're contributing to our community and ensuring that people can be seen, people can be heard, and then they can see and hear themselves in those people. So I really appreciate everything you do, but I really appreciate you being on Queer Talker and sharing your story with me today.
Well, listen, I appreciate you for creating a space like this and giving a platform and a voice to folks like myself to have these important conversations, especially as it relates to HIV. So thank you for inviting me to be a part of this and for doing what you do. And I really, really hope you get Miriam Margolyes on an episode soon, because I want to hear her talking about farting and eating raw onions.
We will reach out and make it happen.